So welcome everyone to my presentation. I'm really glad you're all here. We are a bit of a small group, but that's fine. Then we can have more time for the questions. That's fine. So my talk is called One Codebase, Two Mobile Platforms, How to Test iOS and Android by just writing tests once. And first I will be introducing myself. So as you've probably seen, my name is François Martin. I used to work for SwissQ as a test automation engineer and a consultant. But now, since 1 year, I'm a full stack software engineer and I work at Karakun. And here you can also find all of the details on how to contact me. And also, I am an active member of the Swiss Testing Board. And if we have any people from Switzerland here, we are still looking for members, so feel free to contact if you are interested. And also, as part of the presentation, as well, let's say as part of the topic of the presentation, I also participated in the working group for the mobile application testing certification of ISTQB, and I also can really recommend it because it's also the first ISTQB certification, which is also with a hands-on part. So, and now that you know something about me, I also like to get to know something about you. So I have a small poll prepared. So please answer the questions because like that I can also get to know you a bit better and also cater the presentation more to our audience. And I see also some more people joined. Ciao Sergio. Hi Darren. Great to see you all. And hi Joseph. So let's see, I'll give you maybe half a minute and then we will see what you guys answered. Hi Wim. Great to see you. So, okay, I see there are some answers trickling in. So unfortunately, you can't see the results, but I will quickly read them out to you in a short form so that you also get an overview of what the answers were. So let's see. So most people didn't do mobile app development previously, but there have been 62% of you that did automated mobile testing before. That's great. And you also targeted more cross-platform. That's also nice because I think then my talk is even more fitting. And also considering if you have written any automated end-to-end tests before, it's mostly Selenium on desktop and also mobile. WebdriverIO is also quite high, surprisingly. So that's great. So I'm going to go on with my presentation. So first, before getting into testing, we have to kind of tackle development first, because I mean, how can you test an app when you don't have an app yet, right? And so the thing is, you don't need to know how to develop an app to test an app. So even though a lot of you never developed a mobile app before, that's not a big problem. It's just like it's usually better to have some knowledge in this field. Maybe I can give you some of this knowledge with this talk. So there are two kind of approaches. There is the native approach of doing things. There you have two separate code bases usually. You know, in the early days, you didn't really have any other options than to develop natively. There weren't any hybrid frameworks around. You just had to write everything twice. But yeah, it's very time consuming, of course, if you develop everything twice and you start to lose track quite easily what is implemented and what is not. And then there are a lot of hybrid frameworks. I'm not going into a lot of frameworks that are WebView based, like Ionic or something like that. I'm going to focus more on the frameworks that are compiling to native. So for example, in JavaScript, there's NativeScript, React Native. In Java, there is Clone Mobile, and in C#, there's Xamarin. And there you just have one code base, and when you build the app, it compiles to both platforms, so iOS and Android. So the thing is, how do hybrid app frameworks work? And you're going to see in a minute why this is relevant. Bear with me. But it's not as hard as you think. It's really not a lot to it. So if we take, for example, here a text field that you see in the app, on Android, when you code it, you have something like this in the code. And when you code it in iOS, here it's specifically Swift UI. It's not important, but here you would write it in this way. And the thing is, if you write it in a hybrid language, like here, for example, NativeScript, you will see that you write it like this. And so if we look at it from the other side, if we have a look at what NativeScript does, essentially the only thing that a hybrid framework does is it takes what you give it, for example, this text field here, and then it recognizes this text field, and it executes a function that is implemented in the framework, for example, this one here. It's just pseudocode, but it should give you an idea of how it works in the right way. So first it checks, like, for example, are we building the app for Android? If yes, it kind of returns this string you have seen earlier. And if we are building the app for iOS, then it returns this string, so the one that is relevant for iOS. So you see it also effectively, you have to build the app 2 times. And also effectively, you will see that native and hybrid development isn't too much different in a way, because you still kind of have to write everything twice. But the difference is that you, as a user of the framework, don't need to know any of this, because this is hidden away behind this abstraction here. So you don't need to know anything about native development at all. You just need to know how to specify that you want a text field, and then it takes care of everything else behind the scenes on how to build it for iOS and Android. Of course, if you have some custom stuff, you will still need to implement it once for Android and once for iOS in hybrid languages as well. But you will get pretty far with what is already included in the frameworks. So now let's go to automated mobile testing, end-to-end testing specifically. So it is quite different to testing websites, in my opinion. So especially, for example, the initial setup is much more involved. So, for example, testing on iOS requires a Mac. Well, let's say without Source Labs Real Device Cloud, but it's still recommended. With Source Labs Real Device Cloud, in theory, you could just execute everything there and debug from there, which is very nice. But still, especially if you need to tweak something in the app and want to rebuild it, you could also, in theory, just have it built on a build server, but this takes more time and you need to wait between doing it. And so still, it's more recommended. However, testing on iOS real devices is also quite difficult to set up locally. Here again, if you use Source Labs RDC, it is really easy. In a previous project that I worked on, we used Source Labs RDC as well. And we very rarely had to use real devices because it was so easy to do. It's essentially the same as you would do iOS simulator testing. Also, it's not headless so far. Maybe there will be a headless option in the future. And the most difficult part are selectors. So in the web, it's quite easy because you just have IDs and classes, a lot of selectors that are very technical. A lot of you said they're coming from Selenium. So it's not usually, especially if you're working together with the developers, it's not that hard because they can just implement a new ID or class for you. However, on mobile, it's a lot more difficult. The only real selector that you can influence is the accessibility ID, which represents the text that is read out by a voiceover program in case of a blind person, for example. So this is technically not a technical selector per se, because the problem is that if you choose a accessibility ID that is a technical one, then your app is not accessible, which I wouldn't recommend. I would really recommend to choose a accessibility ID which is human readable. But this causes problems, especially with internationalization and other aspects like that. And if you're interested, I don't think we have time for it in this talk now, but maybe in the end, if you are interested in how to specify accessibility IDs and still use internationalization, you can ask that later if you have time, or maybe in the Slack channel then. Also, I noticed that stable automation requires developing the app designed for testability, especially since you are not really flexible in the selectors that you can use. And also, generally, a lot of platform-specific code is necessary. So in terms of the selector strategies, there are kind of two good options, let's call it like that. So as I mentioned, the accessibility ID is the best one that you can use. There are also, the next best strategy is predicate strings. You will hear about them later. These are for iOS and also for Android. So you see these are both on the second place because the thing is they kind of complement each other, because one can be used on Android and one can be used on iOS. And then there's also the XPath. Just don't use XPath, especially not on mobile testing, because XPath is especially slow and very brittle and will cause unstable tests. So we won't be looking into that. So let's have a look at the selector strategies. And here I'm going to reference WebdriverIO. I know not a lot of people of you know it, but it should be quite similar to Selenium in a way. So an accessibility is denoted by this tilde sign that you see here. So as soon as you write a tilde sign in a selector, it will be interpreted as a accessibility ID. And the UI selector for Android and the predicate, as I mentioned earlier, they are a bit different. So you see, especially among the platforms, they are quite different. So for example, here you have a selector that selects a button with a login as a text. So on Android, you just have class name, and on iOS, you have type, and then the different class names and types are also different. And also in iOS, it's called label, and in Android, it's called text. So yeah, it makes it a bit difficult. But sometimes you just don't have another chance because you can't use accessibility IDs everywhere. Essentially, let's say you have, for example, two texts on the page, accessibility IDs, which are the same, then obviously you can't use a accessibility ID for that. You may have to use a UI selector and predicate. Yes, so now I thought to myself, well, how can we make it easier to reuse those strategies, and how can we make it so that it's still readable? Because I can't reasonably think that if you put this into code, and then especially you can do it like in native development, you can have, for example, two code bases. You can have one code base for the Android tests and one for the iOS tests. But if you want to do it with one code base, as is the goal with this presentation, you have to find a way to kind of abstract them away. And here I was thinking about, let's apply the process of hybrid app development to testing. So here you see, for example, what I did is I added a utility function. And here in this utility function, I'm checking if I'm currently running the test on Android. And if yes, I'm outputting the selector for Android. And if I'm testing on iOS, then I'm outputting the selector for iOS. And then in the test itself, I can just simply write get button with text and say login. And then also this makes it much more maintainable, because I can put this in a lot of different tests that need to get a button with a specific text. And yes, but you can, of course, imagine that if you have a lot of these, then it would get messy quite quickly, because you would have like one that is get button with text, one that is get text field with text, and whatever. There are endless possibilities. So with time, you will end up with quite a lot of code that essentially, just encapsulates this logic. So I was looking at a way to reduce this overhead, and also trying to make this available in a general form, because I was thinking it should be possible to kind of abstract that away in a way that is more usable, even more than that. So, so let me see if I'm going to the next slide. So for that, I developed a library that I'm introducing today. I just open sourced it today, and it's available for free, and it's also open source. It uses a Fluent API, has support for TypeScript, and also it supports WebdriverIO version 5 and 6. It also makes you forget about XPath. Well, that's not guaranteed, but I hope so at least. The library itself uses automated releases in continuous delivery. And also, if you are missing some kind of functionality, then feel free to submit a pull request if you can, or just create an issue. And here you see, for example, how to install it. And here you see a link to the GitHub repository. Here you have also a QR code in case you want to visit it. And also you see that the repository still has 0 stars. So if you really like it, I would be really glad if you could give it a star on GitHub. This would help me out, of course. But wait, there's more. So I'm also introducing wdio-mobile-utils demo, which is a demo application built with NativeScript. And it currently uses WebdriverIO version 5 and has end-to-end tests implemented it that use the library that I mentioned earlier. And it also includes scripts that do the end-to-end testing out of the box. So it does iOS, Android, real devices simulators, emulators, even cross-platform tests. So you can even run a command and then the tests get executed on both platforms simultaneously. Also, it supports the Sauce Labs Virtual Cloud for iOS testing, and also the Sauce Labs Real Device Cloud for Android and iOS. I'm using Travis CI as a build server here, and also on every push it gets built for iOS real devices and simulators, and also Android. And also Travis CI triggers tests on Sauce Labs against the real device cloud platform. So we also get instant feedback. So again, here you will find here a link and a QR code for you to get it. And again, here it doesn't have any stars. So if you like it, feel free to give it a star. And the thing is, you can also feel free to use one of them or both as kind of like a template, since they are really meant to be used as a point of reference or as a template if you're starting out on a new app or testing a new app. And since you have so much already integrated, you don't have to do much apart from that. So what is this library about now? So as I mentioned earlier, you can maybe remember that you have to use, for example, this selector for Android and this selector for iOS. If you use the library, then you just need to write mobile and a $, and then you can do selector and selector type button, and selector text login. Or alternatively, you can see it as this, and you see it's much more understandable. And the biggest advantage behind that is that it will also automatically, depending on the platform you're running the tests on, it will generate either this or this selector for you. So this means this makes it universally possible to use those UI selectors and predicates in cases where you can't use accessibility IDs. So I think this will provide a big advantage and provide a big advantage in reusability and maintainability in your tests. So also, if you're using an IDE like, for example, JetBrains, IntelliJ, IDEA, you also get code completion, which is very nice with the predicate strings and UI selectors. You always have to look up what's the name of this one again, and yeah, how do I use it again in this context, and so on. And this kind of takes away all of the boilerplate from you and the guesswork, kind of. So then if we have a look at the utilities that we provide, it's not only the selectors that you've seen earlier, there are also kind of utilities that help you to kind of tackle those issues that you normally have with cross-platform testing. So for example, the way that you accept an alert or dismiss an alert or check if an alert is displayed is also different on iOS and on Android. And this also encapsulates this for you. And also you have some utilities to check the state, for example, to check if the app is running or if a browser is running in the background, in the foreground, or if it's not running at all. Also to open an app. And then also there's support for gestures. So for example, if you want to swipe up or down or swipe left or right on an element, you can also do that, which is great, I think. So then we are getting into the first demo. So I'm going to show you in a minute a demo that is being performed on the demo repository that I showed you earlier. And for those playing along at home, you can run this command here. And then you will see the same result as you will see in the video just now. Just so you know, because it happens quite quickly. It will open the app. It will click on login, and then it will show an error as an alert that shows you that you need to enter your username and password. And then it will enter it and press login, and then it will continue to the home screen. And this is being run on Android and on iOS simultaneously. Here in this example, I just used simulators because it was the most easy to see the instant feedback. With real devices, it works the same. I tried it as well. Also on Sauce Labs RDC, for example, it works also simultaneously, which is great. Yes, so I'm going to run the video for you. So you see I started the command, and now it's executing the tests in parallel on both devices. iOS is a bit faster on the right. So you see it's already on the login screen. It's clicking OK, sees an alert. Then it enters the text, Hello SauceCon Online 2020. And in the meantime, the Android device also starts up the app and performs the same task. And you can see it really does the same. And this is all just based off one code base. And you see that both tests passed. I can show it to you in the slides again. So it's a bit small, but it says 2 tests passed and 100% completed. So this is really great. You just write the tests once, and then you can run them on both platforms at the same time without having any platform-specific code in your code itself. And another case where you have a lot of differences between Android and iOS is deep links. So using deep links is highly recommended, but as maybe some of you know, on desktop it's really easy. You can just go to www.karakun.com/contact, for example, and then you're on the contact page. However, on mobile, you can't really do it that easily. And this is also kind of reflected in the deep link. It's possible, and you see the library takes care of everything for you. So you just need to write open deep link, write in it which deep link you want to access, and then you need to provide your app ID for Android and your bundle ID for iOS. And this is what happens behind the scenes. So the Android implementation is quite simple and straightforward. As for the iOS implementation, you just have to imagine 64 lines of code here. I tried to put them on the slide first, but it was so much, it didn't really fit on it. And I thought, well, let's just leave it out. But it should give you an idea. It is really a complex process that took me a lot of time to figure out how to do it in a stable and reliable way. And you can profit off of that with the library, which is great. And so we are getting into the next demo, which is to show the deep link also cross-platform. So this is again the command that you need to run, and this is the spec file that is getting executed. So here, again, you will see that that both devices are starting at the same time with the test, and then it will open the deep link. And yeah, I guess you'll be able to see it quite easily. So now we started it. Again, iOS is a bit faster here. So iOS starts up first, but oh, that's a bit strange. Why did it stop? Okay. Okay, we are running into a few glitches here. Bear with me. I hope it works this time. Okay, good. So it seems to run fine now. Okay, so it opens up the app. It needs to go to Safari for iOS. I need to enter in the Deeplink text. Actually, there's unfortunately no real good other way to do this. And it stopped again. Okay. So now it asks you if you want to open a Deeplink, and it opens it up. And you see in this case, even Android is taking so much time to start up that it only starts up afterwards. And you will see that on Android, it's quite a lot easier. It closes the app and instantly starts up the Deeplink, and it should be right. Now it's at the home screen. And it closed the app already. And we have 100% completed. All right. So as you have seen before, you have 100% completed. Everything is great. And now we are already coming to the end of the presentation. I really would like to thank you for your attention. And I want to know if there are any questions. And for any further questions that you have after the talk, after we go over the time, you can join the Slack channel, #1Codebase to mobile platforms. And there you can also ask questions if you had one after the fact. All right, so I'm now ready to take questions.
Hey, François, it's Scott. Can you hear me?
Are there some technical difficulties, or Scott, everything working?
Can you hear me, François?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. Question before I get to the question, there's a couple folks who said that they didn't get to see the video demo. I don't know if you have that play. I don't know if you have time to run it again real quick. If not, we can skip to the questions. We do have a question.
I think we can run them again, and let's see. Please write if you cannot see it again still. So I will show the first demo again. Please give me some feedback if you can see it or not, just to know. Our first demo was fine, someone said. Was it fine for everyone? Great. Okay. So I will just go at the second demo then. Okay. Yeah, the second demo was a bit finicky for me too. So let's go to the second demo. So let's see if it works now. Okay. Oop. Very strange. Can you see the demo? Great. Okay. I'm getting some no's and some yeses. Okay, well, if let's say it doesn't work for some reason, feel free to have a look at the GitHub repository that I linked in the QR code in the top right corner of the slides. I also have both of the demos on there, so you can watch them on your own if there is still an issue for some of you. I apologize for technical issues. All right.
No problem,
Maybe.
François.
Sorry?
I said no problem at all. I mean, we're our best to make a new situation work here on virtual platforms.
Yeah, absolutely.
A couple of questions. One from Sean asking, how is this approach more effective than using mobile elements?
In terms of mobile elements, what are you exactly talking about?
Sean, if you can enter more context. Interim, we'll go to the next question, which says, curious to ask about how you set capabilities for running the automation on both platforms.
Okay, so I can show you that actually. Let me just share my screen for that. Let's see, I hope it works fine. Okay, so let's see, can you see my screen now? Maybe can you give me feedback, Scott, if the people are seeing the screen?
We can see you.
All right, that's great. So in WebdriverIO, it's actually quite easy. So you have those config files here, and I put them in the E2E folder of the repository. So you can also check them out for yourself. And for example, I opened here the multi-platform configuration for the real devices. And on WebdriverIO, it's really nice. You can simply pass in an array of config objects. So each of these objects kind of represents one set of capabilities that is being used to run. So you see, for example, I have, this is my phone that I have, and then also I have a second object here, which is an iPad Pro, and then that's really it. Then after I run the test, then it automatically runs the test with both of those in parallel, since WebdriverIO is built with parallelism in mind. And the same is then also true for the simulator, for example, where you have the simulator on Android here and the simulator on iOS here. And also on SaaS, it's about the same principle. You just pass in the API key for RDC, and that's it. So just define two objects here. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, it looks like a follow-up, François says. So if you pass an object with multiple sets of capabilities, it will run all of them?
Yes, absolutely. So you can, in theory, for example, have, I don't know, 5 different objects in it. If you want to run it on, let's say, 5 different version and platform combinations, that's totally fine. You can do that, no problem. And it will run in parallel. The only limits are your hardware of your system. That's the only thing I noticed. So you can even run, for example, let's say you have the great thing also about WebdriverIO is that it runs every spec file that you add in parallel. So it really pays off to create multiple spec files. So let's assume you have like 5 spec files. Then you can tell it, for example, to run with all 5 spec files at the same time. And if your system allows it, you could, in theory, run it on 5 different Android and on 5 different iOS simulators at the same time, for example. And then you will get the result in like 2 minutes or something like that, which is fantastic, I think. And also here comes kind of the benefit, also in a previous project that I worked on, where we used SaaS Labs RDC. This was a big advantage since we had, if you have, for example, a plan with 5 devices on Android and 5 devices on iOS, and you have, let's say, 10 spec files, then you can have the entire test suite with 10 spec files run in maybe 5 minutes or something like that, which is really nice.
Okay, there's one more question, or there's a few more questions. If we didn't get to your question, you can always drop it in the Slack channel that François shared. That'll be running throughout the day for conversation. But there's a question here, François. Would this also work for web apps that are accessed by mobile web browsers?
Yes, that also works. It's just a bit more difficult to automate apps like that, but it also works. So I just didn't have a look at them in this presentation, but if you have any specific questions, you can also ask me later if you want. But it also totally works, yes.
Okay. Well, I think we want to give everybody time to get to their next session, so I'll let you wrap up, François.
Yes, so I want to thank everybody again, and also to you, Scott, for helping me out, and everybody for coming. I see we have been around 200 people, which is great. I didn't expect so many people. So I hope you could learn something from my presentation. And as I mentioned, if you have any further questions, feel free to contact me in the Slack channel or otherwise. And I'll see you soon.